Hello, and welcome to the first episode of The List, the show where I try everything I can to convince you to watch classic movies, and you respond with a big, unenthusiastic, I'm your host, Travis, but you have no reason to care about that yet, so let's just get started. This being the first episode, I wanted to give you some background on the show. In the year 2019, I set out to watch the complete list of AFI's top 100 movies. I wasn't interested in reviews or a YouTube channel at the time. It was just something I wanted to go into a new decade having done, and having done so, I want to share my experience with you and what I've learned about movies. I want to be clear, this is not a review show. While I have my reservations on some, it's all but unanimously decided that these movies are great, and one short guy on YouTube, devilishly handsome though he may be, isn't going to change their order on this list one iota. I'll be using the show to discuss why these movies in particular are important to us as a society, and why you should watch them. And I'll be jumping around throughout this series, but it made the most sense to me to start at number 1 on the list, 1941's Citizen Kane. Let's jump in. Spoiler alert, I guess, for an 80-year-old movie. Citizen Kane. You've all heard of it. You all know the twist at the end.
Is his sled. It was his sled from when he was a kid. There, I just saved you 2 long, boobless hours.
It is the top of every best movies list. Its presence can still be seen in films 80 years later, with students coming out of film school studying it for its groundbreaking cinematography. Get it? Groundbreaking? Shut up, I'm funny. But the real question is, have you seen it? And if you have you seen it lately? Chances are low, but if you have, gold star. In my experience, it's that movie people claim to have seen to gain an intellectual high ground in any argument about film, but beyond the I have black friends defense of cinema, why should you watch it? Let's hit the basics first. The main plot is that Charles Foster Kane, famous rich man, newspaper tycoon, mansion owner, art collector, and Mistress Haver has died alone in his stately manse, whispering his cryptic last words, Rosebud. We are treated to an overview of Kane's life, revealing in broad strokes the story we are about to see. Every plot point is laid out for us in the first few minutes of the film, and the only thing we don't know is what Rosebud is. A reporter is tasked with finding out, and throughout the movie, he interviews friends and family, filling in the finer details of Kane's life, albeit through their own biases. At the end, having never learned Rosebud's meaning, the reporter comes to believe that the word was meaningless to all except Kane. At the close, we pan over Kane's earthly possessions until we come across a sled, emblazoned with Rosebud, just as it is hawked into a furnace. While the backstory for this film is vast and sordid, making more than one reference to William Randolph Hearst's mistress's vagina, I'll keep this brief, and like Kane himself, I may be presenting rumors and speculation as fact with little regard outside of keeping your interest. 1937, Orson Welles helped to create the Mercury Theater in New York City. After the success of his 1938 radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, yes, that one, RKO Pictures had a contract with him by 1939. Treated like the savant he was, Welles was given an unprecedented amount of freedom for a first-time director. It stipulated that Welles would have to direct, produce, write, and act in 2 films, but it also gave him complete power over the final cut and who he could hire. Of course, he used this to sign on his actors from Mercury, but that's not all he brought with him from his Broadway experience. More on that later. Welles kept RKO in the dark during production, keeping the dailies out of sight, and in the event of anyone suspicious coming onto the set, the cast and crew would stop whatever they were filming and play softball until the offending party left. While Welles claims that the character of Kane is not based on any one person, it's clear that the main inspiration is William Randolph Hearst, famous rich man, newspaper tycoon, mansion owner, art collector, and Mistress Haver. The two had known each other socially, with Welles being snubbed, which led to a decade-long grudge between them. Rumor has it that Welles had overheard Hearst give his girlfriend, Marion Davis's vagina, the pet name of Rosebud. Then Welles got an idea. an awful idea. Wells got a wonderful, awful idea. And Citizen Kane went into production shortly thereafter. Hearst went out of his way to ruin the film, going so far as to try and buy the raw footage and destroy it. He claimed that Wells was nothing more or less than a communist, and when that failed, he banned reviews for the film in his newspapers. It wasn't until the 1970s, 30 years after the movie was released, and 20 after Hearst himself had died, that it was finally reviewed in a Hearst-owned newspaper. Having no experience with motion pictures, Wells relied heavily on theater techniques to tell his story. Instead of the typical shot-reverse shot, he filmed in long wide shots, showing an entire scene at once, much like a stage production. Sometimes, entire scenes are done in a single, unbroken cut. No problem for stage actors who performed for hours at a time on a nightly basis. Wells was also one of the first directors in Hollywood to actually bring his actors together and rehearse their lines, another holdover from theater life. Oh, and remember that part about keeping entire sets in frame? That led to a problem of focus. Instead of other directors pulling focus to draw the viewer's attention, Wells used sound and movement to make sure you were looking exactly where he wanted you to. Cinematographer Greg Tolan pioneered a technique called deep focus for Citizen Kane, using lights and lenses and other complicated things, something about apertures. He kept the foreground, background, and everything in between in crisp focus. This allowed for some amazing shots, like this one that dollies back from the window, across the house, and into the kitchen, all the while keeping young Kane, who is framed in the window, in focus. Citizen Kane did not invent any of the techniques, camera angles, or even plot points found in the movie. Even deep focus was used in previous films, but Citizen Kane perfected the technique, and that is a common expression for the entire endeavor. The film set out to collect all of these things and perfect their use, leaving you with a Bible for the visual language of film. A Bible others have come to follow.
Good evening, Mr. Kane. There is a man. A certain man. And for the poor, you may be sure that he'll do all he can. Who is this one? His favorite son. Just by his action has the traction magnets on the run. Who loves to smoke? Enjoys a joke. And wouldn't get a bit upset if he were really broke. With wealth and fame, he's still the same. I'll bet you find you're not alive if you don't know his name. What is his name? What is his name? It's Mr. Kane! He doesn't like that Mr. He likes good old Charlie
Perhaps this point is more debatable, but I think that the almost complete freedom to make a product everyone was excited for is why this movie is so good. Without the administrative oversight, Citizen Kane is as close to Wells' original artistic vision as one could hope for. And that's why this amalgamation of film, from a first-time director, that so many people worked to sabotage for over a decade is still being broken down, analyzed, and taught to a new generation of filmmakers. Even if you know the ending, even if you've seen it before, even if you didn't like it the first time around like me, I encourage you to watch it again. There are subtleties in the writing and craft that more than make it worth another watch, and it well deserves its spot on the list. For instance, did you notice in this scene that as time passed, Kane and his wife sat further and further away from one another, representing their growing apart? But what is art if you don't connect with it? Let me share with you my personal connection and interpretation of the film. Citizen Kane is the story of a man who just wants people to love him. But due to his upbringing by lawyers and bankers, he comes to see love as everything else in his life, a possession. It can be earned, or failing that, it can be bought. So as his life begins to erode, he fills the void with more and more expensive things, as if spitefully stating, if you won't love me, by God, at least you won't ignore me. a sentiment I have experienced in my life, and I assume is a near universal feeling. Considering the downward spiral that Wells's life became, caused in no small part by his own hubris and pride, I have to wonder how much of Citizen Kane, his magnum opus, was autobiographical, and how much was self-fulfilling prophecy. Thanks for watching. Join me next time when we discuss the things that dreams are made of. Look, I can't force you to watch these movies, but I want you to know that if I could, I would. If my 223-step plan to rule the world is ever realized, you're all going to become very familiar with A Clockwork Orange in more ways than one. Good night.